Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be relent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a microlender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
So today I'm meeting with Dr. Shaan Patel, MD, MBA, and is founder and CEO of Prep Expert. As seen on Shark Tank, Prep Expert is a leading online education company that has helped hundreds of thousands of students improve their SAT and ACT scores, get into top colleges, and win over $100 million in scholarships. Yes, you heard me right, $100 million in scholarship. Dr. Patel raised his own score, SAT score, from the average to perfect, has over 20 years experience with SAT prep, and has authored over 15 books in test prep and entrepreneurship, including Self-Made Success, 48 Secret Strategies to Live Happier, Healthier, and Wealthier. Dr. Patel, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Gerald. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that kind introduction. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. I am really excited about our conversation, as I said earlier, because as I read through your book and got to understand your background, I was so impressed from where you came and what you went through, because it wasn't handed to you, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't handed to you. It was something that you internally had to decide that you wanted, and you figured a lot of things out at a very early age. So my first question I always ask people who come on the show is, how did you get started in your field? Obviously, you're an MD and an MBA, and you have an amazing online company, Preps Experts, that's made you so successful in your career up to this point.
Yeah, so I've got quite a storied background, but I could tell stories for days, but I won't do that to the listeners. So I'll try to give them the quick kind of synopsis of my background and what motivates me. So to your point, it wasn't handed to me. I grew up in my parents' budget motel. My parents are from India. They, came to the United States with $70 and worked their way to owning a motel. And that's where I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, kind of a bad part of the city. But I was really fortunate in that I had parents who worked hard, who valued education, and who really set an example for me. And so that inspired me to work hard in my own education. I ended up doing really well in school, but I was not a very good standardized test taker.
Right.
And that is something I think that's pretty common for a lot of people. Your test anxiety, not knowing the first thing about test prep, college admissions, scholarships. But because my parents valued education, they encouraged me to work hard. And so I did. And I spent this is probably good to talk about, because I learned a lot of the habits about productivity actually in high school when I was studying for the SAT. I spent hundreds of hours studying for this exam, and eventually was able to raise my score from average to perfect. And it opened up a world of opportunities from, top colleges, 500,000 in scholarships, even got to meet the president of the United States. And so when I got to college, I wanted to help other students improve their test scores. I started Prep Expert. In the very first 6-week SAT course I ever taught, my students had an average score improvement of 376 points. That's equivalent of taking a student from the 50th percentile to the 90th percentile.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty incredible in 6 weeks. So I had parents who wanted more courses. And long story short, over the past 13 years, I've trained instructors to teach my curriculum. We've helped hundreds of thousands of students at this point improve their test scores, get into top colleges, and to your point, win over 100 million in scholarships. The highlight of the company was in 2016 when I pitched it on ABC's Shark Tank, made a deal with Mark Cuban for an investment, and he's been an amazing investor, advocate, and partner for the company. We've co-hosted entrepreneurship panels, co-authored books, co-invested in education deals, and he's just been really amazing to work with. And I'm happy to talk about that with your audience too. But that's kind of my entrepreneurial journey. On top of that, educationally, as you mentioned, throughout a lot of when I ran my business, I was also, doing my bachelor's in biology as well as my medical degree from the University of Southern California. I got my MBA from Yale and then my dermatology residency at Temple University Hospital. So it's been a long road over the past 13 years, but happy to dive into anything you think might be useful for your audience.
What I loved about your book and this story was when you talked about working on your MBA at Yale and living in Las Vegas or in Nevada area. And you had to figure out how to swing that by, it was because I was sitting there at first when I looked at it, I was like, how did that work? You got your MBA at Yale, which is on the East Coast, and your medical degree on the West Coast. And I'm looking at the dates and going, wait a minute, he graduated from one on 2017 and the other one on 2016. How did that happen? And so as I read through your book, it was clear how you did that. And we'll get into your different principles like the permission principle, the Pareto principle, the Parkinson's law, and all those things. But I thought, wow, what a journey. But let me ask you that before we dig into that. And I do want to go back and have you share a little bit about your story, because I think it's really important for people to understand that, again, this wasn't given to you. This was something that you, from your gut, right? From your gut, you had to work for, and you realized that it was your internal motivation that was going to make the difference, and the emotions that you would have around that, not just the logical concept of it, but it was the emotional drive that really began to create the law of attraction in a positive way, right? Because we know the law of attraction can also be done and happen in a negative way, depends on what you think about and you feel. But my question is, what do you think is poorly understood in the areas of productivity?
Oh, this is a great question. Some of the top things that I think people have misconceptions around productivity are, well, I am just not good at studying, or I'm just not good at working, or I get distracted easily. You see, I hear that all the time from students as well as parents and other adults.
Right.
And my response to that is no one is naturally good at these things. Everyone at a baseline is easily distracted because our minds are always kind of running around like monkeys, basically. And so, you have to practice it. That's the thing. These days now, I try to teach our students to study for 50 minutes and take a break for 10 minutes. So the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. However, many students are like, I really struggle. I can't do 50 minutes. And that's okay, because when I was in high school, I also couldn't do 50 minutes of concentration at a time. So I say, okay, well, let's start with 25 minutes or 15 minutes or 10 minutes and then do shorter breaks, etc. But you can build yourself up over time. But everyone in the society that we live in, I think, wants instant gratification.
Right.
And so that causes issues with productivity specifically. I would say that it's something that it's a practiced skill, not a natural ability. So that would be my big misconception out there.
Yeah, I talk a lot about on the podcast about the Pomodoro technique, right? And that's when you work for a concentrated 25 minutes and you take a 5-minute or 10-minute break. and you do something totally different to give your brain a chance to reboot, right? Because the conscious mind is like RAM memory. It only has so much capacity, and then it needs to download what it's taken in into the hard drive or the non-conscious mind, which is almost limitless in its size for what it can take in. And then when you come back to it, it's like you've rebooted your machine, right? You've rebooted your brain. So now the brain's ready to take on more. And so I totally agree that you have to chunk the work. Now, with that being said, I want to go back to your upbringing. And I think this is really
Mhm.
important. Obviously, there's a lot of stories that you have, but just share two or three of the really important short stories that represented what you experienced growing up, but yet you didn't allow that to limit your thought process or who you became, because to me, that was more impressive. Your accomplishments are very impressive, but I think to me, it was more impressive what you worked through to get to where you are than just where you are.
Yeah, yeah. So to give the listeners a better idea of kind of where I grew up, I grew up in this motel where it wasn't like, some flashy Las Vegas strip hotel. It's a kind of a rundown area in old Las Vegas off the strip. And so the types of people that would stay at the motel would be people who can't afford a steady income. They're living week to week or day to day out of the motel. So there's a lot of drug addicts, a lot of prostitution in the area, gangs, etc. And so to your point, that was certain, like especially gangs and not the best people in the public schools that I attended
Right.
were always around, but I never got influenced by it. And I really have to attribute that to when you have a couple things. One, when you have a strong family in a cohesive unit,
Yeah.
it never really occurred to me that I needed to get love or validation from any outside source. So
Right.
I think, that a lot of credit to my family and my parents on that. Two, goal setting in education is huge because what I would always have is some kind of educational goal, whether it was to get straight A's, whether it was to get a good score on my SATs, whether it was to go to a competitive medical program. And that really laser focused me in so that I could, go to the library and study rather than, go to parties and things like that. And maybe, start drinking alcohol or doing drugs at a young age, as many people in Las Vegas high schools would and middle
Right.
schools even. And so, I think those would be a couple of the ways that I was exposed to all these things, but I'd say those are a couple of reasons that I didn't get involved, which was to my huge benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. So you grew up in a very difficult situation that wasn't easy. And I think it's really important for anyone who's listening to understand that no matter what situation you're in, if you have a close knit group that's stronger than the ties of the environment that you may be living in at the time. And that's really the environment that you have more control over, or even your internal environment, your thoughts and, how you decide you want to live, that you allow that to be a stronger magnet than the outside environment. Because sometimes people can have a very strong internal magnet, but the stronger magnet becomes the outside and they get drawn into that life or influence. And you set goals at an early age, right? And you learn the power of goal setting and that you could create your reality by the way you thought and your goals. So that leads me to your book because I really love the concept of the book and just the way you've laid it out. It's really clear, all the different principles, and the principles are categorized so you can actually just kind of go to a section and really learn what you need. And I can see it as an amazing reference book as well, in
Mhm.
that you speak in, it's not highbrow, language. It's just common, like you said, you talk the book, right? And then you edit that so it sounds like you're having a great conversation with you as we're doing today. So when you think about productivity, what inspired you to delve into this area of productivity and to focus on working smarter, right? Because you do have a section in the book about working smarter.
To answer your first question, what inspired me to, really focus on productivity is it was almost what would probably happens to a lot of people and anything that they go into in life is you're forced into it, right? And so it's not something that was like, I'm so interested in productivity, but it's more that I had so much on my plate at different points in my life, whether it was going to college and medical school and business school while running a business, or even in high school when it's, high school kids, by the way, are some of the busiest people on the planet, especially high achieving students, because they've got their grades, they've got their extracurricular activities, they've got their test scores, they got their college application, scholarship application. So I realized that if I wanted to live more of a balanced life where I could have, some social life still while working and achieving goals and a lot of times academics or entrepreneurially, I would have to get really good at productivity.
Yeah.
And that's what forced me into, learning more about productivity, learning more about things like what you mentioned, the Pomodoro technique or the Pareto principle, et cetera. And then working smarter to me is the most efficient way to get ahead. What do I mean by that? You really have to examine your day to day. I always look at it this way. How can I optimize this? Right? Like that's the $1 million question that you want to be asking yourself because no one work day or academic day is optimized. And so I don't care how good of a productivity expert you are, there's probably some optimizations you can make. It's this recursive improvement model. And so that's really what working smarter is because you could learn one technique or you could learn a few techniques from my book or your books or this podcast or that. But until you actually apply that and optimize it to your day to day, it doesn't mean a whole lot. And so I really encourage everyone to work smarter by optimizing each piece of their day. Just to give, an example would be when I'm brainstorming topics for a presentation that I'm going to give to a group of students, I used to, have to go back through my books or go back through old presentations or what's new in the news and really think about these days I will optimize the way that I create presentations by using AI, right? Like so you could
Yeah.
use ChatGPT or other tools to brainstorm, okay, these are the topics I want to cover, what's relevant, what would be subtopics. So I've optimized it now. So use technology to leverage and optimize your schedule. But that's just one example.
Yeah.
But my point is there's always a way to optimize your productivity no matter what you do.
I think that's a great question. In fact, you probably saw me pull out my pen and write it down because I love those kinds of questions, especially in your planner. What I think is really important is at the top of your planner that you look at on a daily basis is to write down. I always write down the acronym WIN, WIN, what's important now, right? Every time I see the word win, I'm not thinking like, oh, I won. I'm thinking, okay, win, what's important now? And I love this idea of as you're looking at the various areas of your personal life or your business life and to think, how do I optimize this area? Now, you also, and we talked about a little bit of internal motivation, right? In the internal motivation area, why do you think that's so critical and crucial for success?
It's the most important thing. And, I used to kind of listen to teachers in school and they'd say, it's really important to set goals. And as any student, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'm not taking it that seriously. But you have to get internally motivated because there's really two types of motivation. There's external motivation and internal motivation. And internal motivation or self motivation works 10 times better than external motivation. So external motivation for kids is usually their parents. For adults, it might be your spouse or maybe your job or something else, your employer. But for it to really work, you have to get internally motivated and really want to do it because that is what is going to give you the wherewithal and kind of emotional stability to work through those hard times.
Right.
Because typically, to achieve anything, you know, really of value, you have to work hard. And there's just no way around it. You can work smarter, but there is some level of hard work that will need to go into it. And for you to be able to either study the long hours, work the long hours, concentrate for the long hours, if you're not internally motivated and know your internal why as to what the larger outcome is, then it's very difficult to do that work.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of burnout comes from obviously we want to make sure we're not pushing the gas pedal too far and not giving the brain a break. But life and work gets really hard when we don't feel like we have a good why of why we're working that hard and why we're doing it. And that leads me to ask you, can you talk a little bit about the power of now and how that can also be applied to your internal motivation?
Yeah, so the power of now is so important to me. I learned about it through Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. And before learning about this, I had a lot of anxiety about the future and, are things going to work out? Or I would worry about the past and, that would cause anxiety as well.
Right.
And it's not always easy to practice, but the more you can focus on the present in the present moment, I think that the happier you can be and the more productive you can be because you can only take action in the present. And if you take that action, it makes the future outcomes much more likely to be positive. And so you don't have to worry about it as much, especially, but many people get caught up. They don't want to start a business or they don't want to go after that goal because of all of the worry that they're just worrying about it. They've got a million things. What if it doesn't work out? XYZ worries. Instead of worrying about it, you should just take action in the present moment. And a lot of times things will start to work out. It's almost like a domino effect. You'll see
Yeah.
one thing work, the next thing works, the next action gets done. So it's hugely, hugely impactful for not only happiness, but also productivity. And I want to just touch on your point on win. I love that, by the way. That is something that I do every single day. At the end of the day, I write down in my notebook or my notepad on my computer, at least,
Right.
the top three most valuable tasks I want to accomplish the next day. And if I can just get those done, I find that I am more productive than 90% of my colleagues. And I think that the reason for that is many people, this goes back to your earlier question about what are some misconceptions people have about productivity.
Right.
It's not productive just to do any task because there's really different value weights to certain tasks. Replying to emails or sitting in a meeting, I would say is not as high value as maybe working on your new book or recording a podcast or, doing something where you're producing or creating, or maybe, in a different job, it's a different valuable task. But a lot of people confuse being productive with just being busy. And there's a
Yes.
big difference between that. Yeah.
Exactly. I had a certain order I was going to go in, and you just jumped down.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No, it's perfect. It's perfect because you just jumped down to an area. So I'm going to skip a couple of questions I may come back to because this is important. And it's an area that around prioritization, the importance of prioritization. And in that vein, I wrote down the words, the Pareto principle, the 80-20, and Parkinson's law. Can you talk about the importance of prioritizations in the context of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle, and the Parkinson's law?
Yeah, absolutely. The 80-20 principle and the Pareto principle are probably one of the most important principles that everyone needs to understand. I'll talk about Parkinson's law too, but
Yeah.
just to get started with the Pareto principle and the 80-20 principle, they're the same thing, but
Yeah.
basically what it means is that 80% of your results come from 20% of the effort. And so going back to what we were talking about on how can you optimize work, it's really figuring out what 20% of tasks are going to be the most valuable that really require your time, attention, effort, and energy the most
Right.
so that they can produce the largest results. For example, many high level entrepreneurs or business owners will often hire executive assistants to do a lot of their emails or scheduling meetings, et cetera, because that doesn't fall into the 20% of most valuable work that they do.
Right.
Not saying everyone needs to do that, but that's just an example of how you can optimize your time. So this applies to all kinds of aspects to your life. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that this 80-20 principle is true in science and business and investing and productivity, et cetera. So I highly recommend. I mean, there's books written on it that people can check out.
Sure. Yep.
I have one chapter on it, but there's entire books on the Pareto
Yes.
principle, and the 80-20 principle. That is super important in productivity. Far fewer people know about, but I do talk about in my book,
Yes.
Self-Made Success, which you touched on, is Parkinson's law. And this one is almost as important. And that is work expands to the time available for its completion.
Right.
Now, this is so true. And if you don't think it's true, think about when you were in school, if you had a semester to write an essay, when were you likely doing that whole essay? Usually it's the night before, right?
2 days
It's
before
oh
you
yeah,
write the
two
book.
nights, the night before. And somehow you got the essay done, right? And you probably got a pretty good grade still. And that's because you only gave it a day or two, et cetera. So what I try to do to optimize my productivity or my work or projects, both when I was in school and now as an entrepreneur, business owner, and doctor, is I give myself less time to do large projects.
Right.
And that's a skill in itself in terms of like estimating the amount of time that you're going to need for a project or a task.
Right.
But if you give yourself less time, a lot of times you'll be amazed at how much more you get done. But if you give yourself too much time, what will end up happening is the work will expand to fill that amount of time. So a productivity hack that I like to use is, for example, like I do teledermatology now in my derm practice. So it's all asynchronous, which means that I can look at the photos and videos of the rashes of patients and then return them without having to necessarily have an appointment.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like an X-ray. I'm a radiologist for skin. And so, but what I'll do is I'll give myself less time to go through those photos, videos, make those diagnoses and treatments. And I find I almost always get through it. I'll say, okay, I'm going to block out these 3 hours a day, get through, 30 patients or whatever it may be. And I work really fast to get it done. Now, if I said, oh, this whole day, 8 hours is going to be dedicated to it, I bet you it would take me 8 hours. And so that's just an example of the Parkinson's law that I use in my day to day.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this and you're still thinking, okay, well, Parkinson's law, how does that relate to me? He's a doctor and so on. I would say, think about it this way. Imagine you're going on a Caribbean vacation and you have 2 days before the boat leaves or your plane leaves and you are going on that vacation, but yet you have a report or you have some work or you have a project at work that has to get done before you leave. Will that project get done? The answer is always going to be yes. Why? Because you're going to figure out how to make it work within that time limit. And so what you can do with major projects is to give yourself that fictitious deadline, but just go for it, right? And writing a book and doing papers and medical things that you're doing and so on. And so it is a critical principle to follow, because if you give yourself all the time in the world, it will take you all the time in the world to get it done. Now, I want to go back up to one of the things I want to ask you about. And because you talk about the law of attraction in your book. And obviously, The Secret, Jack Canfield talks about it. I've been interviewed by him and I speak to him quite a bit. And, one of the things about it is that it's not just mental, it's emotional. But I think people practice the law of attraction and they don't know it. And that can also be when you worry about things going wrong and you visualize things going wrong and you emotionally feel that in your gut that things are not going the right way. You're actually practicing the law of attraction in the opposite direction of what it's really meant to be, how it's meant to be used. But it's just a law. But so we can decide whether it's true or not, or how we want to use it or not. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen it work both ways, both positively and negatively. As I mentioned, one of the ways to stop worrying is to focus on the power of now and the present moment. So I think if you are a habitual worrier, like my mom, she worries quite a bit. One of the things you can do is really focus on the present moment. So it's really a balance between power of now and visualizing the future, because that's really important too. I think I mentioned it in my book, but instead of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, I wish he would have called it Feel and Grow Rich.
Yes.
Because that's really the key is you've got to feel it. Everyone who's, kind of poo-poos on the law of attraction says, oh, so if I just, visualize I have $1 million, I'm going to make $1 million. No, that's not exactly how it works. How it works is you literally have to feel like you have $1 million right now. And even if you're poor and you're living in, a not so great neighborhood, et cetera, And that's really hard to do. Not only visualize it, but feel all of that, wealth or success when you're not there yet. And it's happened to me so many times in my own life where I remember when I was in high school, I would feel like I got a perfect score on the SAT and I would just jump up in excitement and be like, oh, I got a perfect score. And I don't know where that feeling would come from. Same thing happened before Shark Tank. And I would feel like I got a deal with Mark Cuban. And, this was before I even got on the show. You have to really feel, visualize, and have it vibrate like through your body,
Yeah,
whatever you want to happen. And it can't just be a one-time thing. It's literally got to be a daily practice because you have to basically, it has to be coming from your subconscious mind.
yeah,
This is a really, really hard concept for many people to grasp. But once you're able to do it, I would say that don't try to do it for 10 different things. Like everyone wants, hundreds or dozens of different things. Just try to do one thing at a time, one really big thing
yeah.
that you really want to happen and focus on it, visualize it, but feel it. And if you can do it on that one thing daily, I guarantee you'll start to take action in your life to maybe move towards that things, but then you'll start to see almost like all the obstacles will start moving away from that one thing you're focused on.
Exactly. And I want to share something with you. And if you're listening too, that can really help you because you may think, okay, well, thought about things I want. I've tried to feel that thing that I want, and it's still not happening for me. And this was a tip I got from a gentleman named Mike Rayburn. And Mike's an amazing guitar player and speaker, and he's performed at Carnegie Hall 10 times. And I went out to a workshop out in Las Vegas with him. He's become a good friend of mine.
Oh,
And he told me that when he was starting in his business, he was coached by Brian Tracy. And Brian coached him and said, okay, Mike, if you want to see these things come into your life, then every day take out a pen and paper, write them down as an affirmation, and then every day write them down, write them out by hand, and then take a few minutes, see yourself living that way, and embody that experience. He goes, the first few days, the first week or so, you may not feel it. But what you're doing is one, you're physically reprogramming the neurons in your brain. You're bringing them closer for that memory. And the act of writing and visualizing basically bypasses the conscious minds and begins to implant those desires and thoughts into the subconscious where the emotions
mhm.
are going to live. So if you have a major goal and you write it out every day, it may take 30 days, it may take 90 days, it may even take a year, depending on what you got to work through to get that through. But I found that if I have a major goal that I'm going after, and I write it out by hand, even on a digital pad, but I can't type it. I need to write it. I need the physical act of writing because of what that does, the physiology of that and what it does to the brain. I can bypass my conscious mind and program that into my subconscious mind. And then I become a magnet for the resources, the
Mhm.
people, the money, the things that I need in my life to make that goal or that dream come true. And so I found that to be really, really powerful. I want to move on to the
Yeah,
last thing I want to ask
that's a
about.
really important, by the way. Yeah, I write it down every single day. I should have said
Yes,
that. Yeah, I write down my big goal every single day, and it's fun, right? Like a
it
lot of people
is.
write
It
down
is.
million dollars, or you write down I'm really successful, sold this many books, or whatever your big. It's fun. It's a fun thing to do, and then you'll be amazed when it happens. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, when I watch my life, and if you listen to my first podcast, you'll hear the story of what I went through with vertigo and losing my ability to walk and using music and so on and so forth. And as I started rebuilding my life through that challenge, I learned that secret. And every day, even today, I write out my goals, right? And
Yeah.
you have something in the book that's called the Morning Power Hour that you have in your book.
Mm.
Also, you have the Donho philosophy. And so I want to end our conversation talking about your power hour in the morning and your Donho philosophy.
Yeah, so I love both of these because I think they're not talked about enough. I think they're both popular principles. But so the first one, start with the morning power hour. This is really powerful for this particular audience and podcast about productivity. This is one of my biggest productivity hacks that I've ever found, which is after a good night's sleep,
Mhm.
7, 8 hours, whatever you have, your mind is so fresh. It's just like it's a magnet for productivity. And so many people waste the first 1, 2, 3 hours of their day not capitalizing on the amazing productive potential of their mind in the morning.
Right.
And so, what I always try to do is I have what's called a morning power hour, quote unquote, which means that I don't do a meeting. I don't respond to emails. I don't do anything except for whatever my highest value task for that day is. It may be writing a blog article. It may be writing a new chapter of my book. It may be working on some new curriculum. It may be putting together some new marketing strategy for my team on a slide deck. But whatever that is, if I can block out at least the first hour, ideally the first 2 or 3 hours, but
Right.
meetings, things come up, but at least the first hour of every single day, I have found that it just leapfrogs me ahead in terms of how productive I can be. So that one's super important. Highly recommend everyone listening take actions, get block out your morning power hour. And then the second principle you had mentioned that I talk about in the book is called the Dundo philosophy. So what that means is it's an old Indian philosophy, which basically is, this idea that you want to really be savvy about money and investing. And you have to take an approach of almost like scarcity, what a lot of immigrants in this country have. And I think why so many people can live the American dream is because they're not wasteful about expenditures. Well, many people are good about applying that in their personal lives. But I think if you take that and you apply that to your business, you will have 10 times more success. Because what many people don't realize is, the average business might have a profit margin of, let's say it's a good business, 20%, right? That means that every time you spend $1, you've got to make $5. So it's either you save $1 or you have to make $5. Which one's easier? Usually it's to save the dollar.
Right.
So figure out ways to be as cost effective as possible in order to increase your profit margin. So that's really what the Dundle philosophy is all about. And if you want to be wealthier, I have a chapter in my book, Self-Made Success, but there's much larger books that go more into the philosophy.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Patel, thank you so much for all of your insight, your wisdom. Again, it's an amazing book, Self-Made Success. It is a great read, and it really is a reference book for success and productivity. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So for all the entrepreneurs and everyone who's interested in productivity or who just wants to live, yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to live happier, healthier, and wealthier? You can check out my book, Self-Made Success. You can find it on Amazon. And then if there's any parents out there who do have students who are going to be taking these standardized tests, the SAT, ACT, or going to be applying to college, we offer online courses and consulting at prepexpert.com.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today, and all the best in all your future endeavors that you're going to have with Mark Cuban, and just the blessing that relationship has brought to your life.
Thanks, Gerald. Yeah, this has been a wonderful interview. I really appreciate it. We got into some really cool concepts. I hope that it helps everyone listening, and looking forward to hopefully working with some of the parents and students. And please do, my email's in the book. If you pick up a copy of Self-Made Success, email me. I'd love to get comments from readers on how the book helped them. So feel free to reach out to anyone in the audience.
Excellent. Excellent. If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.